Welcome to the Red Story, and just subscribe so I understand that everything is not in vain. I'll never forget the day Jack entered our lives. I was Emily, a 32-year-old woman and married for 5 years to Michael. We had a seemingly perfect life, a beautiful house in the suburbs, stable jobs, and a circle of friends with whom we shared dinners and outings on weekends. However, beneath that facade of happiness, a growing dissatisfaction was hidden that I didn't dare to acknowledge even to myself. Michael and I had met in college. He studied engineering and I studied psychology. It was love at first sight, endless nights of conversation, walks in the rain, and promises of eternal love. We married shortly after graduating, convinced that our love would last forever. And for the first few years it did. We were happy, supported each other in our careers, and dreamed of starting a family. But as time passed, routine settled into our lives. Michael threw himself into his work, quickly climbing the ladder in his engineering firm. I, for my part, dedicated myself to my psychology practice. Without realizing it, we grew apart. Conversations became more superficial, displays of affection more scarce. We were still married, but the spark that had united us seemed to have gone out. It was in this context that Jack appeared in our lives. Michael had met him at an engineering conference, and they had hit it off immediately. He's a brilliant guy, Michael told me the night he first mentioned him. You should meet him. I think you'd like him. I remember perfectly the day Jack came to dinner at our house. It was a Friday in early summer. I had spent the afternoon preparing dinner, lasagna, the house specialty, and homemade tiramisu for dessert. I wanted to make a good impression on Michael's friend, though I didn't quite understand why it mattered so much to me. When the doorbell rang, I felt an inexplicable nervousness. Michael went to answer it, and I stayed in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on the salad. I heard male voices in the hallway, and after a moment, Michael entered the kitchen, followed by Jack. "Emily, this is Jack," Michael said with a smile. I turned around, and in that instant, the world seemed to stop. Jack was tall, athletic, with dark hair, slightly tousled, and intense green eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. He was dressed casually but elegantly, dark jeans and a white shirt that highlighted his tanned skin. "Nice to meet you, Emily," Jack said in a deep, melodious voice. "Michael has told me a lot about you." He extended his hand, and I shook it, feeling an electric current run through my body at the contact with his skin. I was speechless for a moment until I finally managed to articulate a likewise that sounded weaker than I would have liked. The dinner went on in an apparently relaxed atmosphere. Jack turned out to be a fascinating conversationalist. He spoke passionately about his work as an architect, his travels around the world, and his love for photography. Michael seemed delighted to have someone to share his enthusiasm for technical topics that had always been foreign to me. However, under that atmosphere of cordiality, I felt a growing tension. Every time my eyes met Jack's, I noticed an intensity in his gaze that made me shiver. On several occasions, I caught him observing me when he thought I wasn't aware, and the worst part was that, far from making me uncomfortable, those furtive glances provoked an excitement that I hadn't experienced in years. When the evening came to an end and Jack said goodbye, I felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. On one hand, his presence had made me nervous in a way I couldn't understand. On the other, a part of me wished the night would never end. "What did you think?" Michael asked me as we cleared the table. "He seems like an interesting guy," I replied, trying to sound neutral. "He is. And he's also a great professional. We're thinking of collaborating on some projects." I nodded distractedly, unable to get the image of Jack's green eyes out of my mind. The following days passed normally, but I couldn't shake off the unease that Jack's visit had awakened in me. I caught myself thinking about him at the most unexpected moments, while attending to my patients, when grocery shopping, even in intimate moments with Michael. A week after that dinner, I received a message from an unknown number on my phone. It was Jack. "Hi, Emily, I hope you don't mind me writing to you. I asked Michael for your number in case I ever needed to contact you. How are you?" I felt my heart skip a beat. Why was Jack writing to me? And why was I so excited to receive his message? I hesitated for a few minutes before responding, trying to find the right tone. "Hi, Jack. No, I don't mind. Everything's good here. How about you?" This began an exchange of messages that became increasingly frequent. At first, they were innocent conversations. Jack would ask about my work, recommend books or movies, and tell me anecdotes about his projects. But little by little, almost without realizing it, our chats became more personal. Jack was attentive, understanding, genuinely interested in what I had to say. He asked me questions about my dreams, my fears, my desires, and I, who had felt invisible in my own marriage for so long, found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't done with anyone in a long time. One night, while Michael slept beside me, I found myself silently crying as I told Jack via message how lonely I felt sometimes. His response was immediate and comforting. "Emily, you're an extraordinary woman. You deserve to be valued and loved for who you are. Don't settle for less." Those words ignited something inside me, a spark of desire, of longing for something more, something I no longer found in my marriage to Michael. The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster. On one hand, I felt guilty for maintaining this secret connection with Jack. On the other, I couldn't deny the excitement I felt every time I received one of his messages. It was as if I had become a teenager again, with butterflies in my stomach and a racing heart. Michael, oblivious to all this, remained immersed in his work. He spent more and more time at the office or on business trips. When he was home, we barely talked beyond what was necessary to keep the house running. Our sex life had become mechanical and infrequent. I told myself that it was normal, that all marriages went through phases like this, but deep down I knew something had broken between us. It was during one of Michael's business trips that everything changed. Jack wrote to me on a Friday afternoon, "Do you have plans for tomorrow? It's a perfect day for the beach. We could escape for a few hours if you like." My heart skipped a beat as I read the message. I knew I should say no, that it was dangerous, that it was wrong. But a part of me, a part that had been asleep for too long, screamed for me to accept. "Sure, I'd love to," I replied before I could change my mind. That night, I could barely sleep. I was torn between excitement and remorse. What was I doing? How could I betray Michael like this? But every time I thought about canceling the plan, I remembered the way Jack looked at me, how he made me feel valued and desired, and that was stronger than any feeling of guilt. Saturday dawned sunny and warm, as if the universe was conspiring to make our encounter perfect. I dressed carefully, a light summer dress, a straw hat, and sandals. I applied light makeup and spritzed on my favorite perfume. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I couldn't help but think that it had been a long time since I had dressed up like this for Michael. Jack picked me up in his car at 10 in the morning. Seeing him at the wheel with sunglasses and a dazzling smile made my heart race. "You look beautiful," he said as I settled into the passenger seat. The trip to the beach was short but intense. We talked, laughed, and sang along to songs on the radio. It was as if we had known each other all our lives. The guilt I had felt the night before dissipated, replaced by a sense of freedom and excitement that I hadn't experienced in years. We arrived at a small, secluded cove. The water was crystal clear blue and the sand white and fine. There were hardly any people, which made the place seem like our private paradise. We spread out our towels and lay down in the sun. Jack started talking to me about his projects, his dreams of designing buildings that would change city skylines. I told him about my patients, about how sometimes I felt overwhelmed by their problems. Without realizing it, our hands found each other on the sand. The contact of his skin against mine sent an electric shock through my entire body. We looked into each other's eyes, and at that moment I knew there was no turning back. Jack leaned towards me and kissed me. It was a soft kiss at first, almost shy, but soon it became more intense, more passionate. My hands tangled in his hair as he pulled me closer. We kissed for what seemed like an eternity. When we finally separated, we were both breathless. "Emily," Jack whispered, his voice husky with desire. No more words were needed. We got up and hand in hand, headed towards a more secluded area of the beach, protected by some rocks. There, away from prying eyes, we gave ourselves to each other with a passion I thought I had forgotten. Making love with Jack was an intense and liberating experience. Every caress, every kiss, every sigh seemed to awaken parts of me that had been asleep for years. I felt desired, valued, alive in a way that I hadn't experienced in a long time. When it was over, we lay embraced on the sand, listening to the sound of the waves and our intermingled breaths. Part of me wanted to stay like that forever, forget the outside world and live in that perfect moment, but reality wasn't long in hitting me. As we returned to the city in Jack's car, guilt began to take over me. What had I done? How was I going to look Michael in the eye after this? Jack must have noticed my change in mood because he took my hand and said softly, "Emily, don't torture yourself. What happened today was beautiful. Don't let remorse ruin it." I nodded weakly, but inside I knew that nothing would ever be the same. The following days were a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. On one hand, I couldn't stop thinking about Jack, his kisses, his caresses. I found myself smiling as I remembered our moments on the beach. But on the other hand, guilt was eating me up. Every time I talked to Michael on the phone, every time I saw his photo at home, I felt like my heart was being stabbed. Jack kept writing to me, his messages full of words of love and desire. I responded ambiguously, torn between the longing to see him again and the fear of the consequences of my actions. When Michael returned from his trip, I tried to act normally. I prepared his favorite dinner, asked him about his work, even tried to be more affectionate than usual. But every time he touched me, every time he kissed me, I couldn't help but compare him to Jack, and that comparison always left Michael at a disadvantage. The following weeks were a hell of indecision. Jack insisted that we meet again, that we give our relationship a chance. Michael, oblivious to everything, continued with his usual routine, distant but caring in his own way. And I was torn between loyalty to my marriage and the desire to live that passion I had rediscovered with Jack. There were moments when I was on the verge of confessing everything to Michael. I even wrote a letter explaining what happened, but I never found the courage to give it to him. Other times, I fantasized about leaving everything behind and running away with Jack, but something always stopped me: fear, guilt, habit. My life became an emotional roller coaster. There were days when I convinced myself that the best thing was to forget Jack and dedicate myself to rebuilding my marriage. Others, when I was determined to leave everything for him. And in the midst of all this, my work as a psychologist was suffering. It became increasingly difficult for me to concentrate on my patients' problems when my own were overwhelming me. One night, as I was having dinner with Michael in silence, I realized that I couldn't go on like this. I needed to make a decision for better or worse. It wasn't fair to Michael to live in a lie, nor to Jack to nurture hopes that I might not be able to fulfill. And above all, it wasn't fair to myself to live in this constant agony. I decided that I needed time to think, to clear my mind away from the influence of Michael and Jack. I told Michael that I needed a few days for myself, that I was stressed from work and wanted to go to my parents' beach house to disconnect. He didn't object. He even seemed relieved to have a few days to himself. To Jack, I sent a message explaining that I needed space, that he shouldn't contact me for a while. His response was understanding, although I could sense the disappointment between the lines. That's how I found myself alone in my parents' beach house, facing the sea that had witnessed my infidelity weeks earlier. The first days were difficult. I felt lost, confused, tormented by guilt and desire. I spent hours walking on the beach, reliving moments with Jack in my mind, remembering the good times with Michael, trying to understand how I had gotten into this situation. One afternoon, sitting on the sand watching the sunset, I had an epiphany. I realized that my dilemma wasn't really between Michael and Jack. It was between the woman I had been and the woman I had become. Between the security of the known and the risk of the new. Between conforming and daring to seek happiness. I understood that my marriage to Michael had died long before Jack appeared on the scene. We had become roommates more than a couple, and although Jack had awakened passions in me that I thought were forgotten, he wasn't the solution to all my problems either. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. When I woke up the next morning, my decision was clear. I returned home determined to talk to Michael. I knew that the conversation ahead would be painful, but also necessary. When I arrived, I found him in the garden watering the plants. When he saw me, he smiled, but his smile faded when he saw my serious expression. "We need to talk," I said. We sat on the porch, and for the next few hours, I poured out my heart. I told him about my loneliness, about how we had grown apart over the years. I told him about Jack, about the adventure on the beach, about how that had been a symptom of something that was already broken between us. Michael listened in silence, his face a mask of pain and surprise. When I finished, I waited for his reaction with my heart in my throat. "I don't know what to say," he finally said. "Part of me wants to be angry with you for what you've done, but another part understands why you did it. I think deep down, I also knew something wasn't right between us." We talked for hours. We cried, we hugged, we shouted, and it was painful but also cathartic. In the end, we came to the conclusion that the best thing was to separate. Our marriage had come to an end, and although it hurt to admit it, it was the most honest thing for both of us. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and practical decisions. We had to tell our families and friends, divide our belongings, decide what we would do with the house. It was emotionally exhausting, but also liberating. As for Jack, I decided that I needed time for myself before embarking on a new relationship. I explained my decision to him, and although he was disappointed, he understood. He told me he would be there if I ever decided to give us a chance, but that he would respect my space. The following months were about self-discovery. I moved to a small apartment downtown, took up old hobbies that I had abandoned, and made new friends. Little by little, I healed the wounds of my failed marriage and my affair with Jack. A year after that conversation with Michael, I found myself again on the beach where everything had changed. It was sunset, and the sky was tinged with pink and orange hues. As I watched the waves break on the shore, I reflected on everything I had experienced. My affair with Jack had been a catalyst for a necessary change in my life. Although infidelity wasn't something I was proud of, I couldn't deny that it had been the push I needed to get out of a situation that was slowly suffocating me. Michael and I had managed to maintain a cordial relationship. The pain of betrayal and separation had given way to mutual understanding. We had even managed to meet occasionally for coffee and catch up like old friends. As for Jack, we had maintained sporadic contact. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if we had tried to have a real relationship. But deep down, I knew I had made the right decision by taking time for myself. As the sun sank into the horizon, I felt a peace that I hadn't experienced in a long time. I had made mistakes, yes, but I had also had the courage to face them and to seek my own happiness. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't scare me. I was ready for whatever came because I had learned the most important lesson, that love in all its forms begins with self-love. I got up from the sand, brushing off the grains that had stuck to my clothes. As I walked back home, I felt like I was closing one chapter of my life and opening another. I didn't know what the future held, but I was ready to find out. That night before going to bed, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I saw a stronger, wiser, more complete woman. A woman who had gone through fire and come out stronger. A woman ready to love again, but this time, in the right way. I smiled at my reflection and turned off the light. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I was ready to live it fully.